Ernest Hemingway once wrote, "The world is a fine place and worth fighting for." I agree with the second part.
The question of having command over your own life should have an easy answer. But if you really think about it, how much control does one have in the decisions they make throughout their life? This is the topic I will be discussing today through my visual essay titled Control and Choice in David Fincher's Seven. Seven is a film released in 1995. Throughout the film, we follow detectives William Somerset, played by Morgan Freeman, and David Mills, who's played by Brad Pitt, as they try and uncover the mystery of the murders committed by Kevin Spacey's character, John Doe. What is existentialism, and how is this explored by David Fincher in Seven? In order for me to answer this question, I must explain the theory of existentialism. In ancient Greece, the philosophers Plato and Aristotle developed a theory of every being has an essence. This means that everyone on the planet is born with a purpose and will go on to live out that purpose in due time. This would go on to become what is known today as essentialism. Within the film Seven, the character John Doe is a clear example of essentialism. John Doe seems at first to be a mentally unstable Christian who carries out a series of horrific murders based on the 7 deadly sins. John believes that it is his essence to carry out these murders in order to serve his God. An essentialist advocate named Greg McCowan is quoted saying, "A non-essentialist thinks almost everything is essential. An essentialist thinks almost everything is non-essential." Essentialism was the standard way of thinking into the late 1800s, where philosophers such as Friedrich Nietzsche introduced the prospect of there being no meaning to life at all. This was the birth of the philosophy known as nihilism. At this point in time, humanity became far more advanced in its technologies due to the Industrial Revolution, causing many people to question the idea of their own existence. The philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche states that the real world is much smaller than the imaginary. When Somerset and Tracy, who is Mills' wife, are talking about how they could not bring a child into this world, this is an example of nihilism in action. This brings us nicely into the 1950s, where the term existentialism was first used. The theory existentialism states that being precedes essence, which is a quote from the theorist Jean-Paul Sartre. This statement means that we as humans are born purposeless, and we gain our essence via influences around us while we are growing up. Many people believed that just the simple fact that Adolf Hitler and his Nazis being able to come into power in the early 20th century was reasoning enough to question the ideology behind essentialism. Thus, existentialism was born. Are people's lives affected by the method of which they are raised? Existentialists would make you believe this to be true. Existentialists believe that how we are raised, whether that being through our parents, our friends, our teachers, or so on, has an outstanding effect on the decisions we make through our lives. Jean-Paul Sartre once exclaimed that, "You might think that there's some authority you could look for answers, but all of the authorities that you could think are fake." Essentially stating that all governments and politicians are no better than the regular man on the street, making them simple social constructs the human race has built over time. Let's apply this theory to the film. Our two main characters in Seven, being the detectives Somerset and Mills, are two extreme opposites, and the film shows this through many different ways. The primary example of this being the difference in skin colour, having Somerset be of a black ethnicity and Mills being Caucasian. There are many other differences throughout the film. This could be through the drinks they drink, the clothes they wear, the way they speak, the way that Mills swears all the time. All of this shows contrast between the two characters, and this is called duality. If one applies existentialist views to this relationship, it becomes very clear that these two characters have had completely different backgrounds and experiences to get them to these situations. Somerset has lived in the city for a very long time, and it's very clear that he has a lot of experience as a police detective in this city, whereas Mills has only just moved to the city, and has only just got the rank of detective. It's also clear that Somerset has had a completely different social background to Mills, as Somerset has a very polite manner to him, whereas Mills is a lot more crude in the way he speaks. The most prominent difference between the two characters is the way they approach their police work. The best example of this is when they are both chasing down John Doe in the apartment buildings. When Somerset sees a passerby, he asks them if there's an exit nearby. In the very next shot, Mills is running around the building with his gun up and then shouts as a passerby saying, showing his clear aggressiveness towards the situation. The only time that Mills and Somerset seem to be able to agree on any scenario is when a third party is involved, and in Seven, that third party is Mills's wife Tracy. Whenever Tracy is either around Mills or Somerset, they would seem to act differently than they had done in previous scenes. From my personal perspective, I believe that Tracy's character is supposed to be presented as a beacon of hope in a dark and gloomy city, full of hatred and anger and death. Lots of death. My theory is supported by every scene that we see Tracy in. She's always wearing something white, which could represent holiness, purity, or even an angel. Which is why, at the end of the film, when she is revealed to be murdered, this pushes Mills over the final line and kills John Doe. If we look at the plot from John Doe's perspective, however, he is simply fulfilling his purpose, or his essence, as a conduit for God's rage against humanity, for allowing these sinners to go unpunished for all this time, in defiance against their Lord and Maker. Considering that our justice system today is based upon the Holy Bible, it would make sound reasoning for John Doe to believe that he is the hero of his own story. Who had the most control throughout the film? Control is one of this film's major plot points. Each character at some point experiences some sort of control over a scenario. By examining each character's control and when they had this control throughout the film, I will be able to find an answer to this question. At the very beginning of the film, Somerset's character has the most control. This is due to Mills still being very new to the job and trying to prove himself constantly to his peers. Somerset's control seems to originate from his experience as a police detective, which is shown in the scene when he's explaining his theory behind the 7 deadly sins to Mills and the police captain, due to Somerset being stood up while everyone else in the room is sat down at the time. The issue with experience is that it can only get you so far. This is proven at the end of Act 1 after John Doe escapes Mills in the alley. This is when Mills takes command of the situation by kicking down John Doe's door and commanding the rest of the police officers, including Somerset, as if they were a flock of sheep and he is the shepherd. However, even though both characters had control over certain situations throughout the film, there is only one character who had full control throughout the entire film's plot. John Doe had full control over most situations throughout the entire film, even though you don't see his face until the 3rd act. John Doe was able to predict almost every move the detectives would make, due to his plan to have Mills become the sin of wrath at the end of the film. Even in death, John Doe had completed his task, due to Mills now being gone and only wrath remaining, and John effectively killing himself, seeing himself as the sin of envy. This just leaves us with Somerset, who is left with no faith in humanity, as he's just seen a woman that he has spent a lot of time with, an innocent woman, be killed in the name of God, leaving Somerset as a nihilist.